Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Bog Panda. Today, I joined Kelly as part of the RG35XX Club, a club that wishes it had a different name. I am Dr. Mike at Official Pagan on all social media, and joining me, as always,
Hi, everybody. This is Kelly at KELLYTHUL on social media. Welcome to Bog Panda. We're glad you've joined us. We'd even be happier if you would like and subscribe to the channel. Really appreciate that. Give it a look, turn that bell on so you know new updates are there. New updates such as updates to the world's shortest podcast, Hard No, available daily with your subscription for free. So check that out. Every episode's under 1 minute long because that's the rule for shorts. And you're going to do the shortest podcast, you probably want to keep it under a minute anyway. And then when you're done with that, go over and check out the merchandise. And that
and that's
sounded
not a
creepy.
euphemism.
That sounded creepy. We have some merchandise you should peruse and maybe select. Would be awesome to see.
Oh, man. I'm still stuck on check out the merchandise.
Yeah, it was creepy. Sorry, folks.
Speaking of merchandise, though, as you guys know, Kelly had already invested in the Anbernic RG35XX. Stupid name, but great piece of equipment. And I think you've had almost nothing but positive things to say about it, correct?
Yeah, I really um no really big negatives. It's at all. It's you can add what you want to add. There's operating system upgrades you can do to make it better. So it's a fine system for me.
Yeah, and I definitely was interested in as well, seeing everything that you've had to say about it and your experience with it, as well as some other reviews that have popped up online. I'm only seeing positive things. So I have a trip that's coming up at the time that we're recording this. We're going to go on for about 10 days, I think. I'm not a mather, but 10-ish days going to the south. That's important because I'm worried that one of them will see me with this and think it's some sort of black magic. But I decided to invest in my own RG35XX. And coincidentally, when I went on, there's a new model of it out, the RG35XX Plus, which adjusts where some of the button placement in the back is. And I believe it has a slightly better processor in there, so you can get a little bit more higher end games on there, but it's not like a huge overhaul or anything. It works essentially the same way. What's interesting though is there's two models of it. There's the Game Boy style, which Kelly already has, which is really what I wanted because I miss the Game Boy form factor playing that. Which is the only downside of playing like an Evercade, which has more of that Switch kind of feel to it. I do miss the Game Boy form factor a lot. So that's what I intended to set out for. But there is a horizontal version, which is the RG35XX H, which is the plus model in a horizontal form factor. And I sent Kelly a few photos of that. So I'm sure you guys are seeing that now. Um, exact same specs as the plus, same screen size, although when you see reviews of them side by side, it really looks larger on the Game Boy style one. And they've even commented on that on reviews. It's just the form factor though. When they put them up literally, one right on top of the other, you can see they're clearly the exact same size. So I mean it's identical. What I like about it though is it does have two analog sticks, which I thought would be really good for shooting games and things like that. But I have to be honest, now that I have it, my biggest negative, the biggest check on the con list for me is the analog sticks are overly sensitive. And I know that you can adjust that to a certain degree, but honestly, for shooting games, the D-pad is way better. When you're using like light gun games and shooting games and things like that, the analog stick, and it's a small screen, so the analog stick just sends your cursor flying across the screen, even when you adjust the sensitivity. So the D-pad actually works way better for that. But the button layout is really nice. You get that sort of PlayStation, Nintendo 64 style, triangle of not triangle cross buttons or plus sign of buttons if you're offended by crosses, plus sign of buttons, and then the shoulder buttons. Everything is really nice with it. I've seen a lot of negative things about, and I don't know, you're way more experienced with it than I am. I've seen a lot of negative things about the operating system. I think it's perfectly fine for what I'm using it for, this is just going to be, long car rides kind of thing. I just wanted some more gaming options for cheap. And this was only a few dollars more than the original RG35XX, so it wasn't a big investment, which honestly, I'm still probably going to buy the Game Boy style form factor at some point because I just want it so bad. But I do have to say, we've talked a lot about like colors of devices and colored cartridges and things on this show, as well as on Hard No, the world's shortest podcast. Make sure you guys check it out. We talked about that stuff, and I've said before, translucent colors. I assume it's my age. I just hit the demographic at the right time, but that really works on me. And that's that sales pitch for whatever reason. Maybe it's my inner prison detainee kind of thing. For anybody who doesn't know, you're allowed to have electronics in prison, but they have to be clear. So you can't hide drugs or weapons in there. Um, but I like the translucent colors, and I especially like atomic purple. I think it's one of Nintendo's greatest gifts to us. So I got the atomic purple edition of it, which I think looks fantastic because I love translucent purple for whatever reason. If you guys don't, you're wrong. It's available in the atomic purple, a translucent white, and then just a solid black. Um, I think it's great. The grip feels really nice. There's like two rubber pieces on the back so that you can set it down and it won't slide around and things like that. Again, I have no issues with the operating system. I've been able to add a bunch of games to it, mostly Sega CD games. The only downside is I'm still working off of the just original SD card. There are two SD card slots, as has explained in his review of it. Um, Working off of that, I'm filling it up pretty quickly, especially because I've added a lot of Sega CD games to it. And those, of course, are larger than the ROMs for Genesis and Super Nintendo and things like that. So there's a folder on there for Nintendo 64. There's no Nintendo 64 games that came pre-added to it. The only game that I had a ROM that I knew for sure worked was Xenocrisis because I bought the physical copy of it and it came with a ROM. That was too large to put on there. So I'm gonna have to wait until I have the dual SD card set up, which I'm not gonna worry about doing that until I get back from this particular road trip. Again, this has hundreds of games loaded up to it. The only another thing of note, which a lot of reviewers pointed out, there are no Mario games in the preloaded ROMs. Nothing. There's Nintendo stuff, but nothing with Mario in the name on there. I assume that was Nintendo probably sniffing around in some sort of legal capacity. So no ROMs of anything with Mario. But again, super easy. Just drag and drop them onto the folder. And I've had no issues with anything else. Everything works great. The analog sticks feel great. Again, I've only really used them in fighting games just because I think it's a little too sensitive on the small screen. But everything seems to play great. And Sega CD games play great. And it's not a specifically like intensive system the way the Nintendo 64 or Jaguar is, where you run into problems with the emulation. I think it's just that the games are bigger in comparison to other 16-bit games. So you don't usually see a lot of Sega CD games on these types of devices. And I think there were 10 that were pre-installed. I don't know about yours when you got it, but I believe there were like 10 games pre-installed, and I added at least 10 more to it.
Yeah, mine was light on the Sega CD in terms of initial setup, and no N64 folder. And so yeah, it's like on the I mean, the operating system side of the equation. Uh, I mean, there are a couple subtleties that I think make it worthwhile to do, but there's nothing urgent beyond the only urgency that I recommend is getting off that the SD card that was provided because it is on the road to corruption. It's gonna happen. Those are just not particularly durable, particularly if you're popping it out and adding ROMs and popping it back in. They don't weather well. So I do that. Operating system wise, it was or still remains, to my understanding, for my version, to get to Nintendo 64 playability, I couldn't go with the stock OS. Um, And then really the only thing that I have found is, I mean, you can change the icons and stuff, so it could look maybe slightly cooler with a different OS. I don't know how important that is. It did some of the things around power off, going into standby mode and powering off can be made better with a different operating system, and overclocking or underclocking becomes remarkably easy with something like a Garlic OS. And so depending on, so on some of the Amiga stuff, overclocking it has been helpful for me on that. But for nearly everything else, they're not big issues. So if you're not running into the need to overclock or underclock with a lot, or if your use of it is, I turn it on and I use it till it's dead, and then I'm going to charge it back up. So standby mode's not like super important to me. Those are probably the driving factors. But I think, and I still need to do this, moving to the OS on one SD card and all the ROMs on the other, I think will make your life just a little bit easier down the road as well. Because I think I may swap OSs one more time, and now I'm going to have to kind of deal with everything sitting on that card, all my ROMs and everything. And so it'll be a little bit of a hassle versus being able to kind of swap out to, here's the original OS, here's Garlic, here's, so something to think about. Yeah, and also props for thinking ahead. I think the more prison ready your entertainment is, the better you'll be served.
I try. But yeah, so far everything's great. Most of the games seem to run fine. There's PlayStation 1 stuff on there. The couple games I tried ran fine. I think it's one of those things where unlike, and I love Super Console X, but unlike Super Console X, which is just a gigantic ROM dump on there, this is a much smaller games list that it came preloaded with. So I think for the most part, it's stuff that they know runs or is optimized. There's a couple of things that it looked like it was couldn't play or was struggling with. Garou Mark of Wolves was one that I just tried before we started doing this. That's a particularly large game, and it seems hit or miss on the emulation. For me, that's one of the games in the Final Fight, not Final Fight, I'm sorry, Fatal Fury, slash King of the Fighters franchise, and it's a particularly large one. It's one of the more popular ones, but the game ROM itself is pretty large. It took a while for it to load up. I thought it wasn't loading up, and then it just suddenly kicked in. But I mean, it was a noticeable difference than starting even other Neo Geo games and larger games like that. So there are certain things it seems to struggle a little more with, but for the most part, almost everything on there just loads up immediately and plays fine right out of the box, so to speak.
Yeah, so we'd be interested in hearing from you folks if how you solve your portable emulation needs going forward. And we are definitely not fans of the name, but big fans of the Anbernic RG35XX series.
Yeah, the name is awful.
Awful.
Ken Hank nailed it with Super Console X. Like you need something short, memorable. The Anbernic RG35XX is terrible.
It's
And
too
now
much.
you're adding plus and H to it and things like that. And it's no. Rebrand.
Our gift to you, Ambernick. Change your name. I'm sure you've not heard from anyone.
I'm
It's
sure we're
like
the
what?
first people to mention this.
Like what the hell? Yeah, cool. So anything else to add, sir?
No, I mean, so far so good, but the real test will be when I go on the trip because I'm gonna have this just I don't drive for anyone who doesn't know, so I will be sitting up front in the passenger seat with this for hours and hours at a time. So I'm really gonna put it through its paces in a way that I haven't yet.
Bog Panda.